This is going to be one of those topics where I'm going to sound like I'm crazy, and then hopefully by the end of it, I'll make a little bit more sense. I like to read. I like to write. I tend to read things that are having to do with things I'm interested in, like history, like current events. And for that reason, I have sometimes, even if I don't agree with a lot of these different conservative commentators, been inclined to check out what they have written. Just like a curiosity will come about. And this is also the case when there are progressives that write books. I've bought and read all of Sanders' different books except for the first one, Outsider in the House. But what I thought was really interesting about these different books, and this isn't just specifically about an ideology, but more so one of the issues I have with punditry and the whole like cult of personality of different public figures in the US, politicians or commentators. What I picked up on is that it seems like most people that are in this field, right, of either running for office and holding office or just being a commentator, they seem to have some kind of deal locked in where they're not writing a book because they have some interesting thing to say or some information to get out that's worthwhile, but more so for the sake of cashing in on who they are. So, for example, Biden, second most recent U.S. president, he got a book deal for $10 million. And you ask yourself, did Biden get a book deal for $10 million? This is a guy who historically was always poor. He had a net worth of like 27 grand when he was the VP the first year of him being vice president. After being vice president, he became a millionaire several times over. But you ask yourself, did Biden get a $10 million book deal because he's this great author who is going to tell this riveting story of the boy from Scranton, Pennsylvania, who through years and years and years of being in public service persevered and became the oldest president ever elected? Is he going to write some book that's really great and profound and insightful about politics and his life? Or is it so that the publisher, who knows of his extremely high name recognition as a former president, can cash in on what he writes or possibly has penned by somebody else? And that's part of what I'm upset over, right? Which is that people are supposed, in my opinion, you have to agree with me, but people are supposed to write when they feel as though they have something to say. It could be something about policy. It could be something about history. It could be something about yourself, and I'll give some examples later. But just that's one of the issues I have with modern day publishing and writing, which is that so much of people's interest in writing and who is like who's writing it versus if it's good or not. But then you have the other examples of, so again, this goes back to that like cult of personality thing, right? I don't like to say anything bad about him, but I'm gonna have to mention him. Charlie Kirk is a good example of what I'm about to use, or I guess criticize, which is that like taking your name recognition and being under what appears to be some kind of contract where either every year or every 2 years you have to write a book. And it doesn't matter how crappy it is. It doesn't matter how just lacking in terms of anything worth saying it is. As long as you're under that contract or you think you can make some money, you will continuously trot out this slop for the sake of enriching yourself. So, a good example. Kirk wrote his first book in 2016, Time for a Turning Point. And 2 years later, he wrote Campus Battlefield. Now, that second book was called by the Weekly Standard a hot mess, a marketing pitch for TPUSA, his group, that was, stuffed with, reprints of his tweets and the quotes of other people. 2 years after that, the MAGA Doctrine. 2 years after that, the college scam, how America's universities are bankrupting and brainwashing away the future of America's youth. I actually wouldn't mind reading that book simply because I agree with the college scam in theory of it costing way more than it should, and like people get out of school and then their degree doesn't help them to actually get any type of income or good job at all. But you get the idea that every 2 years, from 2016 all the way up until actually I take that back. Technically he had a book last year and then this year coming out posthumously, unfortunately. Unfortunately because of his passing. But you get the idea that every 2 years a new book coming out, and you ask yourself, of all these books, would any of them sell or be of any public interest to people if it didn't have Charlie Kirk's name on it? Because I remember being on Amazon and seeing his books, prior to his passing, and noticing that you could get them for $2, $3, $4 because people would pick this stuff up with the name, because of the name of the person, skim through it, either decide it's not good or just be disinterested after looking through a little bit of it, and then put it up for resale. That's how I was able to get a signed copy of Carrie Lake's book for I think it was $7, and I didn't even know it was signed until I saw where she signs on the dust jacket instead of in the book like every other sane person. But another example would be Mark Levin. This is someone who every 2 years puts out a different book. The newest one is On Power. The one from 2 years ago was The Democrat Party Hates America. The one before that I think was American Marxism. And you go with these books, right? Every book, and this is another pattern I picked up on, with most of these modern books by different either politicians or pundits, they always have a certain length. They're always about 200, 300 pages. Usually anywhere from 200 to 400. You will almost never see any of these books be 500 or 600 plus pages. And the reason for that is because this is not stuff which is necessarily being made because, oh my God, I have this very important story to tell. I have this very important policy discussion to be had. No, it's simply a matter of, I know my name being on something makes it sell more than other people's names being on these same types of things. So I can have some ghostwriter, or maybe they write it themselves, right? I can type up some crap, and then somebody will go and proofread it, and then we'll put it out every 600 plus days, and then people who watch my show or whatever will go and buy it, and maybe they'll read it, maybe they won't, but I'll make some sell. And I don't know, it's again, for me the issue is not that they're writing books, but you just for example, I read The Democrat Party Hates America. Now, I'm no fan of Democrats. I have said repeatedly that they don't care, on average, the politicians, about anyone but their donors and enriching themselves. But I would say the same thing about the Republicans. And when I read that book, I felt as though I was being given this extremely bare bones, hyper partisan history lesson that leaves out a lot of different things. That I just, I asked myself, would it be more worthwhile to read an accredited historian's book about the various hells of the Democratic Party, or just different, prominent Democrats, than this book by a conservative pundit who's seemingly under contract to put out a different book every 2 years, forever? And that's where we start to again question how worthwhile is this stuff. If you asked me, let's pretend I'm some big commentator, right? I've got 5 million YouTube subscribers, 3 million, 8 million, whatever. And they say, we want you to write your first book as a commentator. If I'm writing one about any issue, it'll be the housing crisis, not just in California, but across, the US, all the homeless people. And it would be structured in such a way that we would kind of start with, how many people were just living in squalor in prior decades and eras, throughout American history. And then we would get to the present day, and we would talk about all the different forms of homelessness, right? The people that have to sleep in their cars, people that are sleeping in, under bridges, and just, getting into how the issues and the causes of this stuff, right? High rent, jobs that do the little part-time underwork employee crap, you would really like break it down. That would be a book that, if I'm just picturing it in my head, because we're going to have some anecdotal stories to kind of like illustrate our points at various instances, it would have to be at a minimum, I'd say, about 600 pages, if not even longer. Because it's really supposed to be this indictment on the idea that the richest country in the world is fine with having hundreds of thousands of people sleeping on the streets. And then whatever services it claims it provides are just not enough. But that's my point of like, if I were writing a book like that, or a book about, the gun crisis in the US and all these mass shootings, or a book about, the environment or some other specific topic, it wouldn't be 200, 300 pages, and it would almost certainly not come out every 2 years. And I wasn't even trying to single out, Levin and Kirk, right? Because, this Bill O'Reilly, same thing, killing Lincoln, killing Reagan, killing Kennedy. What's the other? Confronting evil. He's a lot more brave, like just open about, I got just keep pumping these out forever and ever and ever. But you get the idea that this is a thing that these pundits do, where they're not writing books for the sake of educating someone or saying something which may surprise people about public policy, which is the main thing that they comment and make a living from talking about. This is simply a cheap way to garner even more money by virtue of who they are. Like, no one is reading, again, Kamala Harris's newest book because, oh my God, it's so juicy and it's like this big behind the scenes shock and surprise of what's going on. No, it's because they're reading it, or rather, how many people are actually reading this stuff? They're buying it because it has her name on it, and she was the most recent Democratic presidential nominee. Of course, she's following the plain book of Hillary, the playbook of Hillary, right, with what happened. And it's like, again, is the issue that Kamala Harris wrote a book? No, anybody can write a book. But it's like, if I were her and I'm writing a book on, like what is essentially a memoir, right? I think it would be a lot more serviceful in terms of like, here's something that can stand the test of time, to write a book about her whole time as VP instead of the last, 4, 5, 6 months, right? Write a book about running for president the first time, and hey, I thought I was going to win and I was doing really well, but I ended up dropping out before Iowa, and then I thought I would just go back to the Senate and sit there for the rest of eternity or until I could run again. And I'm being picked for VP, and then I'm being put in charge of immigration, which I have no actual power to do anything about as VP. I think a book like that, a book that like fully went into running for president, being picked for VP, becoming VP, basically having your hands tied as VP, getting thrown into the shortest presidential campaign in modern history. I think that would be a much more beneficial and worthwhile book to the various forms of writings that we've had about history. But the issue there is that if she were to write a book about, a solid, I'd say that's 4 or 5 years of her life instead of just a couple of months or a few months, it would probably take longer to put out than what she was anticipating, which was, right after losing the election, you can have a book, a little container of 300 pages that basically should have a green $sign printed on top of it, because that's the only reason it exists, out and in stores before the election was even a year ago, so you can cash in on your recently heightened name recognition. And again, it's sad because, like I said, this is not about having an issue with people writing books. It's that you look at how many of them are just coming out year after year, usually by the same, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 people. And you ask yourself, how much of this stuff is really worth reading? And I'm not being partisan, right? Like, There are plenty of supposedly left-wing people I've tried to read the books of, and I was like, yeah, this is horrible. I'm just saying it's really sad that we've gotten to a point where, with our cult of personality associated with politicians, right, of like, oh man, I'm a fan of this person, I'm a Trump Republican, or a Biden Democrat. It's like we get to a point where these people could sell us ice trays with their name on it and we would buy it. Not everybody, or most people, but it's like, when a book is selling 800,000 copies, and it's not because it's some well-written thing, but rather because it's the book of a radio host who kept promoting it on his show, watched by, I guess, millions of people, and he's already making money off of doing his show, but now he's got to make some money off of some crappy book that people are going to buy and mostly not even read. Or if they do read it, it's just reinforcing whatever biases they already have. It's amazing how lucrative these echo chambers are, Like I said, if I were going to write a book about politics, it would probably be about some issue, some series of issues. And I wouldn't do one every 2 years because, again, we're trying to actually research stuff and have something that can stand the test of time. And that's what makes it so unfortunate that everything is just kind of in a loop where all of this stuff is just sort of repeating itself and nothing's really worth reading if it's all just, oh, here's my my new book. Oh, what's it about? Oh, I think the other party is evil. Okay, well, that's definitely something I could hear from every single other pundit that ever existed. Especially in these polarized times where farming outrage is like one of the main ways to, get attention for yourself. I don't know, it's like, I'm someone who likes to read. I'm very much into books and, just people writing, but it's kind of sad to see how much of it is just not even worth engaging with. Like, you can take a lot of these people's entire catalog of novels that they've written over the course of 10 years or longer, and if you were to read them or not read them, there would be no difference whatsoever. Which is kind of crazy because it's like, you would think with public policy, there would be no shortage of different topics to discuss and talk about. But instead, because a lot of these different pundits, and I say this again, of not of any party, but just of the fact that their job is to basically get attention for themselves off of people being hurt or otherwise not doing good. Their way of writing about people being hurt or not doing good is to simply turn this into clashes of personality, right? So I guarantee you in Harris's book, and I know this from reading the one she had in, was that 2019, the memoir she had, I think it's called Truths We Hold or something to that effect. But it's like, you're not going to see her talk about all the homeless people in their home state because they don't, again, not affected by that. They're not, and even if even if they did talk about it, they're going to blame those people. They're going to find some way to not actually have to address it for that much. So like I said, they've turned the act of writing and, just any publications into a cheap, cost-effective way to financially enrich themselves. Where the main thing that people are going to this book for is not that the author is really esteemed and they're able to write these interesting or very fascinating exposés about different topics, or they have some story to tell in terms of their autobiography or whatever. It's literally just, oh, I know that person, their name is on this, let me get it, and then they enrich them. It's sad too, because it's again, there's so many different things that could be written about with the premise of politics, but they don't want to do that. One, because they either don't know anything about it themselves, or it would take longer to write in detail about a specific issue because they're not actually passionate about anything besides making themselves more money. And that's true of both sides. I could name on maybe one hand the number of political like of books written by politicians and pundits in the last 10 years that were actually about addressing a specific issue and, you know, some other like thing that's hurting people, or, you know, something that, you know, that is like actually detailed in terms of, wow, I didn't know this. Everybody else is just writing something to make themselves some more money.